Predator teacher arrests are rattling the nation as disturbing cases of alleged abuse by trusted educators continue to surface. In Wisconsin, a former teacher's aide faces multiple charges after shocking allegations from students. In Oregon, a viral TikTok sparked an investigation into years of misconduct by two high school teachers. And in California, a beloved elementary school teacher's dark past continues to unravel as more alleged victims speak out. These stories are actually beyond belief. We're going to break down the most horrifying teacher abuse scandals of 2024. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, across the nation right now, the very people who are entrusted with shaping young minds are now being exposed as some of the most disturbing predators in our communities. 2024 has already been a year of chilling revelations as a wave of teacher arrests has shocked parents, students, educators, us. These aren't just stories about inappropriate behavior. They involve teachers, aides, school staff who have allegedly crossed the line in the most unimaginable ways, committing horrific acts of abuse that have shattered lives, that have exposed deep flaws in how these cases are being handled. These cases are a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk behind closed doors in our very schools. And maybe the most shocking part, how many of these teachers were able to seemingly hide in plain sight, allegedly using their positions to manipulate and control vulnerable students. This is the chilling truth behind the teacher abuse stories, the scandals of 2024. And I'm going to break it down right now. I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to bring on Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson to talk more about this. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. Good seeing you. Happy holidays. I'm going to go case by case with you on this. But before we even do that, have you personally been seeing an uptick in these kinds of cases, teachers being arrested?
Not only just teachers, Jesse, but people that are in positions of influence. And you said it in your monologue. They put themselves in positions to have control over vulnerable people. Yes.
Yeah, that's the disturbing trend. I've been trying to figure out why we're having so many of these cases. Has it always been going on? Is it just being reported more? But let's get into it, because I want to begin in Kenosha County, Wisconsin, where just last month, new details emerged about Anna Maria Crocker. This is a former teacher's aide in Silver Lake who now faces multiple felony charges after being arrested in connection with several child sexual assault incidents. So the 33-year-old was initially arrested in October on 3 felony charges, but there was a newly amended criminal complaint that was filed on November 1st and revealed a chilling escalation, with the number of charges now rising to 7. So the new charges include multiple counts of child sexual assault, exploitation, enticement, and I don't think you're going to believe who some of the alleged victims are, because Crocker, who is a mother of 4, was employed as an educational assistant at Riverview School, which serves students from kindergarten through 8th grade. And she was terminated from her position at the school after the allegations came to light. This is a lot to unpack, so I'm going to start with the first allegation. We're going to call this the sleepover incident, where in early October, a man contacted the Kenosha County Sheriff's Department to report a very disturbing incident involving his 13-year-old son. The child, referred to as ZG in official documents, had reportedly been at Crocker's home for a sleepover with her son. So the alleged victim told authorities that during the sleepover, which occurred several months earlier, he had been sexually assaulted by Crocker. In the criminal complaint, which was obtained by Law&Crime, ZG recounted the evening in a statement to police. He said that after playing basketball, going for a walk, playing video games with Crocker's son and other friends, everyone went to bed at around midnight. ZG slept on the couch in the basement of the Crocker home, and when he says he awoke a few hours later, he woke to a horrifying scene. According to the complainant, ZG described how his pants and underwear were pulled down to his knees. He says the defendant then took ZG's hands and put it on her breasts, and ZG said he told her repeatedly to get off of him, but she wouldn't listen. He also tried to push her off. Now, at some point, ZG says he was forced into having sex with her, and when he was trying to get away, the friends came downstairs, supposedly saw Crocker run away. He eventually confided to his mother about what had happened when there were rumors that were circulating around the school. So, Chris, let me bring you in here. What are your thoughts about the fact that this woman was a mother and hosted a sleepover for her son where she allegedly abused this 13-year-old?
Was that part of her plan from the get-go, is to use her own family as a hook and bait to get one of her victims there in her own control? Did she wait until everybody was asleep? That's what predators do. They plan this. They have the ability to look and build out what's going to, help them fantasize and act out. None of this is a surprise. Unfortunately, maybe to some of your viewers and listeners, but this is the world we live in.
And talking about that, when law enforcement receives a report of potential child abuse involving a teacher or school employee, how do you go about responding to that? What are some of the initial steps?
Well, right out of the gate, you talk about a profession that has to be kept pure. From pre-K all the way up to, obviously in high school, you see that teachers have control over their students. It's no different than law enforcement. A police officer or a jail deputy, somebody in probation, parole, when you have control over somebody, that control by law subjects that person to a high standard that if you violate, you're going to be charged. In this particular case, we see somebody who took advantage of not only their school position, but also their position in their family. And when law enforcement sees this, the assault that you just described did not happen on school grounds. But look what happened after this case was developed and they started doing public, press conferences. More came out because many times these individuals, and I would venture to say most times, they're not caught on their first act. This is just the beginning of it. And that's why Law and Crime is so important in your platform, because you're telling these stories that will encourage other people to tell their stories. There's more out there.
That's the hope. And unfortunately, you're 100% right. And look, I think you make a really, really good point, and twofold. One, you're right. When people are put in that position of trust, legally speaking, those charges can be more severe because it's abusing that level of trust, being in that position around vulnerable individuals there's laws that are specifically tailored to that. But with respect to Ms. Crocker here, if anybody thought that this was it actually gets much worse, because apparently a 14-year-old boy identified as JPF told authorities that he had been in contact with Crocker on Snapchat. Yeah, and what started as apparently inappropriate communications, according to JPF, escalated. The complaint reads, JPF then went on to disclose in detail to Deputy Hyatt how the defendant sexually assaulted him in a parking lot. Then, a third victim, a 13-year-old identified as CPW, also reported that Crocker had sent him explicit videos of herself. And at one point, she sent him what he thought was a workout video. Turns out it was not. He told police CPW described that in the video, he could hear vibrating noises and that the defendant was saying something. When CPW first opened it, he thought it was a workout video. It wasn't. He stated he was, quote, too young for that. And CPW said then he became scared, blocked the defendant. He said he was scared because of what had happened to his friend ZG, who told the CPW that the defendant raped him. Then investigators uncovered messages that Crocker allegedly sent to several other young boys. In one instance, a 13-year-old boy named RDH told police that he received a message from Crocker asking how he was, and he had to block her when she allegedly said that she liked that he was 13. Another victim, identified as SDW, also said he received inappropriate messages from Crocker after she reached out to him on Snapchat. SDW told investigators that Crocker had mentioned seeing him at a homecoming event, inquired about his age. She allegedly disclosed her occupation as a teacher, her side job as a real estate agent, before continuing to engage him in this personal, private conversation. So, Chris, what you're seeing here, aside from an escalation and potentially a number of alleged victims, is a significant aspect of this case involves digital communications, victims reporting inappropriate Snapchat messages from the alleged perpetrator. What do you think about that? How does law enforcement handle the digital evidence?
Well, without a doubt, the phone, the tablet, the Chromebook, whatever platform, that is the new creepy white van of the modern day. We talked about it growing up in the 60s, 70s. Don't go there, don't go there. That is in the pockets and the purses and the backpacks of our kids today. The digital communication opens everybody up to a worldwide platform where predators are not just locally, like you see in these school districts, but they're nationwide, they're global. That's where sextortion comes in. If we think for a second that this isn't going to get worse, then we're undermining and we're almost being naive to what could come. That is the mode of transportation when it comes to predators finding their victims. That's how they communicate. That's how they get there.
Snapchat has that platform where you send a message and sometimes it could disappear. Are there challenges in obtaining this electronic evidence, or is this something, it's not a difficulty for law enforcement to actually preserve the social media content or text messages or things like that?
Well, without a doubt, Snapchat is one of the most difficult because it has that built-in delete. And we still do search warrants and preservation orders, but these aren't just the platforms that they're used. Many times they start the conversation on Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, then they'll take them offline to another chat app that is completely offline. And they want to move them from these big platforms because I feel that they're more concealed and they can talk deeper and deeper and start making plans. We had another guy, he worked at a college, as a community college down in Florida, at Broward County, named Peter Pajic. And he used this to not only find his victims, but go beyond his borders, contacted a 12-year-old up here in Michigan and flew from Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, all the way up to Detroit, found her, took her to a hotel, monetized it for 3 hours. She was that 12-year-old who got that DM on Instagram. So all these platforms, they're built for good, but they have a part of them that can be used for evil. And that's where we as parents and as protectors need to be aware that it's out there and to protect our kids, the most vulnerable, from those areas.
You're 100% right. And one of the things that you mentioned, and it came to me, was that, as we're talking about this story and you're hearing about multiple alleged victims, how does law enforcement interview them? How do they approach a conversation like that? Because you're getting not only sensitive information from any alleged victim of sexual abuse, but talking about teenagers, you're talking about young boys or young girls. How do you deal with that conversation? How do you do it?
I think it's important to note that what we've just described is a female predator. Most people, when you're talking these topics, they think of a predator being a male white subject, which 9 out of 10 of them they are in America. In fact, if you go global, 9 times out of 10, they're from America or from Europe when it comes to the consumers of child pornography and all the things that we see. That being said, when it involves a school and a young kid, first thing we do is maintain contact with the family. And we find out who's the number one most trusted family member. Then we contact the school, because we do know, like you just saw in this case, when there's one, many times there's more. But law enforcement and those that do it right have a great relationship with our forensic interviewers. Here in Genesee County, we call them Voices for Children. These are not just child interviews. They're forensic interview, spectacular professionals. They are the best in the business. They'll talk to 2-year-olds, they'll talk to 12-year-olds, 17-year-olds, whether it happened a week ago or 5 years ago. That forensic interview, Jesse, many times is our best and sometimes only evidence. That's what nails down jurisdictions. That's what nails down the elements of the crime. So when you interview these individuals, even the first contact, we try to make sure that if it's a male that's young, that we talk to another male officer or a detective to try to give them the courage and the encouragement to come forward and be brave. If it's a female victim, we use a female officer. We try to match temperaments because we want to try to break down that fear factor. Because ultimately, unfortunately, that victim, soon to be survivor, has all the evidence locked up inside their mind and their heart.
And we can't forget what impact that's going to have or potentially have on these people when they grow up. By the way, talking about interviews, a detective apparently interviewed Crocker, in early November. She reportedly admitted to receiving explicit videos, she said, from JPF, saving them to her phone. She also confessed to sharing the video with another female student at Riverview School. And during that interview, Crocker's responses appeared to be reportedly evasive, and she didn't offer kind of any explanation for her actions. She was, of course, fired from Riverview School back in October during a board meeting. She was arrested. She is facing a slew of charges, including first-degree child sexual assault, possession of child pornography, sexual exploitation of a young child, exposing genitals, exposing a child to harmful material, child enticement, exposure to harmful descriptions. And by the way, despite these charges, despite the allegations, look, I will say this for a lot of the cases we're covering. She's innocent until proven guilty. She'll have a day in court, but my gosh, pretty tough to argue against. And she appeared in court, pleaded not guilty. And to be clear, if she was convicted on all the charges, our understanding is she would be facing more than 100 years in prison. So I want to move now on to the second case to talk about with Chris. This really involves 2 teachers, actually, because they were arrested together in a case that began talking about social media with a series of TikTok videos. So it was this initial TikTok video that was uploaded by a man named Doug Weaver, a former student at St. Helens High School in Oregon, that brought a whole history of secrets to light.
This particular school had a $3.5 million settlement for allegations that they know that students are in danger and they do nothing. Everybody knew. I knew that Robleski was a risk to students in 2006. When I was in his history class, one of my best friends was in that class with me, and we would always go work out in the hallway because she couldn't stand to be in the room with him. Everyone in that school knew.
So back in September, Weaver, a 2007 graduate, posted that video accusing the school of protecting so-called predatory teachers. And his video referenced a lawsuit regarding a former teacher, Kaye Robleski, who was convicted back in 2019 of sexual abuse. That video quickly gained traction online. Many former students reached out to share their own troubling stories of abuse at the hands of teachers. Really, in particular, two faculty members, choir teacher Eric Stearns and retired teacher Mark Collins. So as more stories started to pour in, Weaver decided to take action. He contacted Safe Oregon. This is a state-run tip line dedicated to handling allegations of abuse. He forwarded the messages that he had received, and this was what seemed to be the catalyst for an investigation that would eventually expose alleged widespread abuse. So, Chris, this case, quite unique in the fact that it seemed to be a TikToker who really broke this whole thing open, or at least fueled the conversation, fueled the investigation. Again, talking about social media, what are your thoughts on this? Social media playing a role in maybe helping catch alleged predators?
Well, without a doubt, we use it. You use it. Chris Hansen uses it. So there is that powerful tool that we can call the digital social media. And in this case, it did expose the openness and the culture. I think that's what's stunning is you have multiple people involved. And what you just said is this TikToker said, this is a culture of abuse that the schools try to settle civilly. That is not uncommon. That schools want to be able to offshoot this by making a civil settlement with a non-disclosure. I've seen that in my own cases. I had a devastating case where a special principal that was selected to be part of adult education was using that portal to sexually assault 16, 17, 18-year-old kids in order for them to pass their GED. And they would meet them offline. But, you know, by the time it was exposed, they had already received settlements. Years went by. Now these victims are in their late 20s. They don't want to deal with it. But the predator just went from one school district to the next to the next. So I applaud that TikToker. It broke open a criminal enterprise.
By the way, just I was thinking about this, flipping it, playing devil's advocate. People accuse people all the time of things, and some of these claims aren't true. When you're in law enforcement and you receive a claim about a sexual abuse, particularly at a school, I imagine you have to keep that very, very close to the chest, because the worst thing would be is for a false allegation to come to light, and you look into this and you say there's nothing here, and someone's reputation is ultimately destroyed. How do you verify? How do you back up? How do you see if there's substantiating evidence for claims of sexual abuse?
Well, that's a great point, and it all starts with the interview of the victim, the complainant, or the parent or guardian, whoever's bringing it. But we also match that with real evidence. Many times when we're talking to individuals and we get an interview, we match up their story details, their facts, their locations, their times. Plus, you can feel many times when someone is speaking from the creative side of their brain or the recall side of the brain. But I'm going to tell you, when these claims come forward and how they come forward, we take them serious until proven otherwise. We don't try to disprove a victim, because that's why a lot of victims don't come forward, because they don't think anybody's going to believe them. So we actually overcompensate by wanting to hear from these victims, no matter how old they are, Jesse, no matter how long ago it's been. Tell us your story. And then it's our job to validate. So when they use a detail or they told a friend, we have a case that's in circuit court right now, that the friend that was told this assault happened years ago is a key part of our case, because now that information was validated by a third party before law enforcement was even involved. You're not going to get physical evidence, certainly not biological evidence, if these complaints are brought in months and years later. But you are going to be able to take the statement of that victim and start putting some pieces together. And then ultimately, our office and police around the country will take the confession of that individual. That is key. That is key. Many times those phones have conversations or even photos that validate what the victim's saying. Right. And all you do is you just piece it together, and there's your case. Talking about that, in this case, in mid-October, detectives, they reached out to Weaver, this guy on TikTok, and they informed her, look, we've already begun looking into these two individuals, Stearns and Collins. The remarkable thing is, despite the prior warnings and complaints about Stearns, he apparently was still employed at the school when this investigation began. And it soon came to an end, however, when both of them were arrested on multiple charges of sexual abuse. But Chris, it makes me wonder,
How was it that he was still employed at the school? What is that relationship between law enforcement, their investigation, the communication they're having with school districts? Does that surprise you? I mean, talk to us about that interplay.
Yeah, it absolutely surprises, because unfortunately, this is an allegation that if there's any merit to it, you got to separate. Just take them out of the situation and let the case develop. But I can tell you, when it comes to investigations, we know very quickly if there's something going to come from this. And so we advise the school, not only do you need to separate, I've told schools you need to fire immediately. Because when schools are not informed, sometimes it's because law enforcement doesn't share details. I look at a school administration as a co-labor in this seeking of justice. And we have to make sure schools are not kept out there and alone and without details, because they're going to answer to parents, students, and school boards and the community. But that's why it's so important to have great communication and relationships with your schools. That's why we have school resource officers in these schools, to build trust between the superintendents and administrators and teachers and aides and parents. Those relationships got to be built before the chaos comes.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because Stearns, let's talk about this again. So Stearns, who is a 56-year-old choir teacher accused of sexually abusing 6 girls between 2015 and 2024. Collins, who had retired as a teacher, allegedly abused 3 students between 2017 and 2023. Both men now face numerous charges of sexual abuse, range from inappropriate touching to more severe forms of assault. The alleged victims, who've chosen to remain anonymous, they described instances where the abuse occurred both during and after school hours. And for Collins, even after retiring, the allegations continued. And the news of these arrests sent shockwaves throughout the St. Helens community. Parents, students, former classmates of the victims, they expressed disbelief, anger over the school's handling of the situation. In fact, during a very tense school board meeting, community members demanded accountability from school administrators for their failure to act sooner. St. Helens High School placed Principal Katie Wagner, Superintendent Scott Stockwell. They were both put on paid administrative leave. School Board Chair Ryan Scholl also resigned in the wake of this scandal. And most recently, going back to former Principal Katie Wagner, she was hit with misconduct and mischief charges for her alleged role in allowing the abuse to continue under her watch, accused of essentially doing nothing to stop it. Chris, so here you have the school board and administrators. They came under intense scrutiny from the community after the arrest. Some individuals are now facing charges. What do you make of that if we're talking about accountability or potential accountability for the school?
Well, I can tell you, without even knowing the details, the reason that happened is because they knew something potentially before they advised law enforcement. I need to make sure that every school administrator, anybody in control, churches, wherever you are, the second you find out something's wrong, you immediately report it. You have a duty to report. You have a duty to act. Let law enforcement put the pieces together. Yes, you can protect the integrity of your school, not by hiding what could have happened, but reporting what might have happened. That's protection.
Yeah. By the way, Wagner, she pleaded not guilty, due back in court in January. And Stearns and Collins, they've also both pleaded not guilty. They're going to wait their days in court. But now let's head out to Ohio, because this is our next story, where a married mother of 3, former counselor at St. Xavier High School, Emily Nutley, facing 6 counts of sexual battery after authorities say she engaged in a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old student. And the alleged misconduct occurred while Nutley was working as a supervisor for an academic support program at the prestigious all-boys Catholic high school in Springfield Township. And this relationship reportedly began in the fall of 2023 when the 42-year-old began communicating with the student outside of school. And prosecutors say Nutley sent the victim explicit texts, nude photos. The two engaged in sexual acts on multiple occasions, including in Nutley's office after hours and off campus. Now, the alleged encounters took place over several months, with at least one incident occurring in November of 2023, another in December 2023. Chris, now we're talking about acts allegedly occurring on school grounds. That's a whole different level.
Clearly, there's no conscience to say what is right, what is wrong. And if you look at the age, and it's important for your viewers to realize that when you have a 17-year-old and you have an adult, that may have the ability to consent. They do not have the ability to consent. When they are a student in a school, they do not have the ability to consent. And she took advantage of that. And she took advantage of his youth. Remember, that's only a 17-year-old brain. When they do it in school grounds, that's the most egregious, most sacred place that you can have as a student, let alone somebody who's being sexually assaulted. It's disgusting. And that's what you saw that happened in that school.
Look, and again, these are allegations. I'll be very curious to see how she and the other defendants we've been talking about will defend themselves. Because look, here's the thing. In this case, despite the victim's reported attempts to stop the encounters, Nutley allegedly continued to pursue him, sending additional harassing messages. In fact, the school became aware of the situation after conducting their own internal investigation, and that led to the involvement of law enforcement here. Now, Nutley, who had been with St. Xavier for a short time, was arrested on July 3rd. She's charged with 6 counts of sexual battery, each a third-degree felony. And following her arrest, Nutley was granted bond. Strict conditions, though, like she was ordered not to have any contact with students or staff at St. Xavier. She's being monitored with an electronic bracelet. Also, by the way, we did a little research of our own, and we checked into Nutley using a powerful background checker called Truthfinder. And the only criminal history she apparently has is related to not registering a dog more than 10 years ago. By the way, Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But look, even if you don't work in true crime, it can just be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind. After all, it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with a paid subscription service, you can get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. So right now, if you're interested, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports at truthfinder.com/LC-SIDEBAR. So apparently no criminal history. I don't know if that's different, if that's unique. You actually see that. I say this all the time. For alleged criminals or defendants who are convicted, they have to start somewhere. Their first crime could be one of the worst crimes possible. But does it surprise you that when you have somebody accused of this, they might not have any prior criminal history whatsoever?
Does not surprise me one bit, because I have seen since we started GHOST, our Genesee Human Oppression Strike Team, which is now global, 9 times out of 10, these individuals have never even had a traffic ticket. They are experts at being concealed. They know exactly what limits they can push. They know positions and platforms they can use. It is not common for them to have a criminal history. Do they? Yes. Most do not, including this case.
And by the way, Nutley, she's awaiting her next day in court, and if convicted, she could face up to 15 years in prison, and she would also have to be required to register as a sex offender, which, by the way, before we go into our last case, Chris, let me ask you about that. In your experience, do you see a lot of people who reoffend after they've been convicted or pled guilty to sexual assault charges?
Well, I can tell you, in America, it's the one crime that even when convicted and you do your time, that you're held on a public registry for 25 to life. There's no other crime in America that after you complete all of your civic requirements, that you still have to be held accountable. That should answer your question. There is a type of person that commits these kinds of crimes that needs to have guardrails in their life. They need to have accountability. Most of them just stay between those guardrails. They have to navigate through accountability. But it's not uncommon to see people that can't turn that switch off, which is even more important when we see registered sex offenders reoffend. It does happen. Yes, it does.
Let's go to our last case now out of California. And by the way, this is, I'm sure we're unfortunately going to have a lot more in 2025. But this concerns Matthew Shelton, former elementary school teacher facing multiple criminal charges, civil lawsuits after being accused of sexually abusing several students during his tenure at Robert Semple Elementary School. In February, the 42-year-old was charged with 5 felony counts of lewd acts with a child under the age of 14. These charges were later amended to 7 following the discovery of additional victims. So this alleged abuse took place over several years from 2018 to 2022, involved young girls, some as young as 6 years old. Shelton allegedly abused students both in his classroom and during school-sponsored events such as overnight camping trips. You know, Chris, I wonder, what advice do you give parents who are entrusting their children to these teachers, to these administrators in a school or a school trip?
Yeah, it's shocking as a parent. You know, my kids are older, but you got to be involved. Be involved, and schools need to have so many accountability roadblocks into these scenarios because they are wrought with gaping holes. And in this particular case, it reminds me that if there's one thing a school can do, I mean, look what we do in today's world when it comes to dealing with active shooters. It's built into our system. These teachers, administrators, they all have to constantly pound the message. What inappropriate conversation is, what inappropriate contact is. Don't be alone with these individuals. Male, female, it doesn't matter. K through 12, it doesn't matter. I think schools, and I'm sure a lot of them do it, but predators will find a way to be alone. And the more you can have cameras and accountability and other parents involved and other people involved, they try to find places where they will be concealed. So my advice is to always have some type of accountability built in every scenario, whether it's in the classroom, on the field, on the court, in a locker room, everywhere you go.
That's a good point. Let me just put a bow on this and say what happened here. So Shelton had worked for the Benicia United School District for nearly a decade, taught 5th grade at Robert Semple Elementary. The district confirmed that Shelton didn't work during the 2023-2024 school year, but he had been employed there since 2016. And prior to that, he worked in the Napa Unified School District. And guess what? He was accused of molesting 3 children in 2007 while he was there. He was acquitted of those charges after a trial, but his teaching credentials were suspended. But despite that, he later resumed work as a substitute teacher in 2012, was hired full-time by Benicia Unified in 2015. Chris, I was going to end it there, but I just got to ask you real quick. How does that happen?
Yeah. Great question. Who did the background on that case? And you have somebody, even though he was acquitted by the jury, his teaching certificate was removed. Why take the risk? Why take the risk? And somebody obviously did, and look what happened. And I think it's important to note, look at the time frame where the first alleged incident happened to when it was caught. That wasn't the only time frame. This was a long history. And unfortunately, it's just part of this system. There's more victims that have yet to come forward. People like that do not shut down. This is what predators do. They do not stop.
Well, following his resignation from the Benicia district in 2023, he briefly worked as an assistant principal in the West Contra Costa Unified School District. He was placed on admin leave there as well after the criminal investigation came to light, so we'll see which way that shakes up. Chris Swanson, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for coming on, breaking it down for us, and thank you again for the great work that you, your team, the Ghost Operation does. Love having you on, and I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more in the next year, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.